Stewart Gatsi has a background in construction design and 3D modelling, but he's now an independent singer-songwriter, a recording artist, an educator and an author. Born in Harare, Zimbabwe, his experiences across more than 15 countries play a key role in shaping his outlook. In 2019, Stewart officially released his first fully professional recorded musical project, the 7-track EP Songs on My Bike. Currently based in Ho Chi Minh City, his first book, Rough Guide to Planet Earth, is the first in a series of books chronicling his tumultuous 20-year journey across 4 continents. It chronicles his adventures and misadventures, starting out in Zimbabwe, then subsequently migrating to the US, Cyprus, Dubai, and ultimately a return to Zimbabwe after almost a decade of living abroad. Ensuing events eventually led him to travelling yet again, with experiences taking him through South Africa, Vietnam, Singapore, Cambodia, Hong Kong and Malaysia. Find out how travelling has impacted Stewart's life and why it led him to writing his debut book, Rough Guide to Planet Earth. Welcome to the Turning Readers into Writers podcast, where we teach beginner writers how to find the time and the confidence to write their first novel. I'm your host, Emma Desi, and I'm very excited that you're here. Thank you for joining me today, because if you've been longing to write your novel for forever, then this is the place to be. Think of this as your weekly dose of encouragement, of hand-holding and general cheerleading as you figure out how you're going to write your first novel. Trust me, as a mum of 3 young kids, I know how tricky it can be to tuck some time aside for yourself on a regular basis. And even when you do find that spare 5 minutes, you can feel so overwhelmed that no writing gets done. Trust me, I have been there, but this podcast is going to help you in practical ways, because once a week I'll be delivering an episode that gives you steps to building a writing routine, encouragement to build your confidence, and cheerleading until you reach the end. Okay, let's start. Well, Stewart, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to talk to you about your book, your travel memoir, especially because I've traveled to some of the same places as you. So I'd love to hear about them from your point of view. But I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, because I know you have a few different strings to your bow. You're not solely a writer.
Right. So, I am a travel writer, we talked about, and I'm also a musician. I've worked in architecture and construction, and I'm also an educator.
And tell us a little bit about your music.
So I started recording and singing in 2008, I believe. That's when I recorded my first kind of serious track. And then after that, it grew and mushroomed in something that I eventually started traveling with. And it became also an avenue to travel and something I could share as I was traveling as well. So I've been doing that. It's over a decade now. Yeah.
And you mentioned there that you're also an educator. So as part of your travels, are you teaching as well?
Right. So this is something I started doing maybe more recently when I moved to South Asia, which is where I'm based at the moment. I'm currently based in Vietnam. And I went into that because that was something I felt I would enjoy more, as something that I could do to give back in some way, shape, or form. I've been working construction design for, and that was fine. It was good. I was designing this, but I just didn't feel like I was giving back enough. So I decided to switch to teaching when I moved to South Asia, and I felt that was more rewarding.
Mm-hmm. And are you teaching English, for example, or are you teaching something more construction based?
Right. So I'm teaching English as a second language, and working with kids and adults. But a lot of times I probably focus more on the corporate side of things.
Okay. So you've written this book called The Rough Guide to Planet Earth. So tell us a little bit about it. Tell us, what is the book about? What's the memoir about?
Right. So I guess as we were discussing before, I guess it took me a while to realize I've been fortunate to have been able to live in four different continents and still going. And I felt that that there was something I had to share for sure. And throughout living in all these different countries, I had kept a journal and I just kept it stocked away for a while. Um, and so the book is broken down into each chapter, basically. Each chapter breaks down in a different country. And basically, it's just essentially my experiences, followed by my research and then my review of that particular country and what I felt or experienced or researched from that. And the idea was primarily to share with people and to try and paint the picture that different people can travel to the same country but have completely contrasting experiences.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. In the introduction to the episode, I've mentioned that you are from Zimbabwe and you've traveled through South Africa. As you say, you're in Vietnam now, but you've also been to Hong Kong and Malaysia and Cambodia. So I'm wondering, what was it that prompted you to leave Zimbabwe? Because you could have, you've mentioned that you wanted to sort of give back in a way, and you've done that in Southeast Asia, but you could equally have done that in Zimbabwe. What prompted you to travel abroad?
Well, essentially, by and large, I grew up in Zimbabwe in the 90s and going into the late 90s, early 2000s. And so at that particular moment, Zimbabwe was going through a transformation. I believe it still is. And so the economy wasn't doing so great, even though Zimbabwe still has a reputation of good education system and a good backbone to an education foundation. But when it came to actual opportunities and then furthering my education, beyond being in Zimbabwe, I knew I had to travel. So the first time I traveled, going abroad, was a traveling train with my mom to Botswana from Zimbabwe. She decided we need Botswana groceries for some reason, so we went over there and did our grocery shopping and looked around, tourists for a few days, and then came back. And I think from then the travel bug bit me. I always wanted to see different places. And then the first place that I subsequently traveled to after Zimbabwe was the U.S. And that in many ways also became my second home. I still have family there and friends there. So yeah, that there were, I guess, multiple reasons for that. But I think that initially, probably traveling the first time had just impact on.
It's exciting. And the travel bug is something that once it gets into your blood, that's it. You want to see as much of the world as you can. So you mentioned that.
Yeah, it's so true. It is so true.
You mentioned that your book, Rough Guide to Planet Earth, started as a journal. And so then you decided to transition it into more of a memoir that would have a readership. So how did you decide to, well, first of all, you had a lot of things going on in your life because you've got your music, you've got your teaching role as well. So how did you, on a practical level, kind of fit in your writing time as well as all your other day-to-day responsibilities?
Fitting in my writing was, for me, very easy. And I learned this from my music. And so I didn't initially know how to play guitar. I still say I don't know how to play guitar, but I can play bass rhythm guitar. But before I knew how to do that, I practiced and I watched beginner videos. And what I did was I set myself a minimum time limit. Say every day for 5 minutes, I'm going to practice guitar, at least at the very minimum. And then before you know it, it goes into something more. So I transferred that ethos to writing. And so every day, whether I was tired or annoyed or whatever, I would just write for at least 5 minutes. And usually it turned into 30 minutes or an hour or hours. So I think it's just about being disciplined as well and just setting yourself that goal, um, and actually doing it and holding yourself to account. That's important as well. Like, it's important not to lie to yourself. So if you're going to set yourself something, then do it.
Yes, no, I absolutely agree. It's one of the things that I always teach my students is, especially when they're transitioning into writing more regularly and with greater intention, is to schedule it in and start small. Start with sort of 5, 10, 15-minute sessions and see where it takes you, because it's about, as you discovered with your music, it's about building a habit and getting into that habit so it becomes part of your life and it's not scary anymore.
Yeah, definitely. I believe that if somebody says to me, I want to do this, or I'm passionate about this, but I don't have time, I don't believe them, because you have 5 minutes. Everyone has 5 minutes at some point in the day. So I think that's important.
Yeah. Oh, great to hear. I love to hear someone else who's got the same kind of attitude towards it as well. Makes me think I'm on the right track. So you mentioned as well that each chapter of your book is based on one of the countries that you visited. So did you decide to do it kind of chronologically, or how do you decide to structure which countries went into which chapter, which order you did it in?
I organized it chronologically, but I wrote it in haphazard order, basically. So for some strange reason, the very first chapter I wrote about was living in the US and my experience living there as an international student, as a migrant, and all these things. So for some reason that ended up being my large chapter. And I think probably because it had the biggest impact on my life and growing up and becoming an adult there. And then I realized, though, that wasn't the beginning of my life and I needed to create context. So then I wrote about Zimbabwe as a nation, its brief history, and then me growing up just after independence and then subsequently moving. So structure doesn't necessarily, well, I think structure is important, yes, but I don't think which order you write it in is. And what I found also, feedback from other people that have given the book, is that some people will look at the book and then choose a country they are familiar with or they think they would like to read about, and then they read about that in my experience there. So it all depends on you as a writer, but the thing for me is just actually do it. Just actually do the writing, and then the organization in itself can come at the end once you look at it as a whole.
So kind of writing the stories or the chapters as the momentum took you and as you were kind of ready to write it, and then get your manuscript down, if you like, and then restructure it and reorder it to fit your needs.
Yeah, to fit your needs or what you want, right? It depends what your main purpose is, right? If you want to paint a particular picture, then you do it in a certain way. But I think a lot of things maybe that people worry about are just, I think, overcome in actually just taking the action. Sometimes you don't know. I mean, I'm a first time author, so many of the things I wasn't aware of, so I had to learn about and research and wake up every morning and watch a video about marketing your own book, or basic things like that.
Mm-hmm. And so when you were writing it, when you were sort of taking the journal entries and turning them into the memoir, did you have a narrative arc in your head? Was there a story that you were trying to tell? Or did you think of it as being more a series of almost anecdotes that you would tell about each stage of your journey? Or did you have an idea that you wanted to be that you wanted to have a through line or a narrative arc?
And I guess maybe this goes back to my main aims in writing a book, but what I wanted to do was to tell a clear story, because one of the most common questions and common and most confused questions that I receive from people is, where are you from? Because if somebody asks me, where are you from? I'm going to say, okay, well, can you be more specific with your question? What do you mean? Where was I born? Where do I live? Where have I lived? What languages do I speak? Or what sport do I hold? So what do you mean? So it came from that. And I honestly thought to myself, when somebody asks me where you're from, I'm just going to give this book. And so that's where everything, came full circle.
So it sounds like maybe you're not sure yourself. You're such a nomad that perhaps you kind of feel maybe a global citizen rather than a citizen of one particular country.
Well, absolutely. I mean, and I think I maybe find it less of a confusion and more. I see myself as a global citizen. I could certainly myself fitting into different societies and different cultures, and that's only through my past learning processes, of course. But I think the term global nomad is very accurate.
If I tell you, if I didn't have kids and a family, I wouldn't mind being a bit of a digital nomad myself. I think it's a good life if you can get it. So as you mentioned,
and it's not as far out there as you may think.
Do you think? I mean, actually, it's true. I do come across more and more people who are probably younger than me, but are still enjoying taking full advantage of what technology can afford us now, in that so many people can take their work with them wherever they go.
Absolutely. And I think that will probably grow more with time. Definitely, I think, as you mentioned, you have a family and your kids, I'm sure the way they work is going to be different to the way you work.
Absolutely. I think they'll be doing jobs that we haven't even heard of yet, I'm sure. So you've mentioned that, that you're a debut writer. So I wondered which other writers and perhaps other memoirists or travel writers you've come across that have influenced you. Which writers have you enjoyed and that gave you the kind of impetus to write your own book?
Well, I'll start out with my childhood. As a kid, I was at a school called Watershed College, and it was a private school in Zimbabwe, Anglican school. And so I remember my librarian. She always recommended certain books for me. I guess she could tell by the type of person I was, what type of books I may like. So I started reading these books simply because of my librarian, Ms. Nichols. So anyway, I used to read the Hardy Boys. I read the Hardy Boys when I was 13, and I was hooked instantly. And then I discovered Stephen King, who just scared the daylights out of me, but I couldn't stop reading. And then obviously, I went into John Grisham. And then I also started going into nonfiction books as well. So I started reading autobiographies of my favorite actors or authors. And then I also discovered a lady by the name of Alexa West, who is, she basically writes travel guides with an alternative point of view for different countries. And she is a person that migrated from the US and now has traveled throughout the whole of Asia and I think Europe as well. So she was also very much an inspiration as well. And when I viewed my memoir and what I could make out was her profile and her books, because she's written multiple books. They definitely helped me to focus and understand exactly what it is that I was doing. So yeah, just by being a reader of her. her books. She specifically writes traveling books for women, and I found her format very intriguing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it emphasizes how important it is that, particularly not just as beginner writers, but if you're changing genre, for example, how important it is for us to get to know that genre, whether it be fiction or non-fiction, so we understand how it works and what readers like, and sort of draw inspiration from that. We've kind of got to know our genre before we write in it. Yeah. One of just kind of talking about beginner writers, a lot of us, and we get scared at the beginning of not being good enough and not feeling that we have what it takes to write a book, either fiction or non-fiction. Was that something you worried about when you first started? And if you did, what kind of made you push through that and write the book anyway?
Well, to answer that sort of last bit first, I think it's partly because I had a slight chip on my shoulder. And that came from traveling to many different places and being asked lots of different questions that over time can start to get to you. So I felt in many ways I needed to share the knowledge and the education that I had from particular places. Mm-hmm. But you're right about one thing though. There is that fear of not being good enough, or not being people not liking your work, or being made fun of. But there are a couple of things that I did that really pushed me. I'm fortunate that I know 3 different independent authors. So what I did when I completed my first manuscript, I just sent my manuscript to all these different authors, and I just said, hey, just please let me know what you think. Give me an honest review and let me know if you think I should change anything, if you think I'm out of my mind. So I sent that out, and for about 2 weeks, I was very nervous. And I even had a few regrets in those moments. And then I got feedback from author by the name of Chiluba Masonda. He's a Zambian American author. He's in Kansas City, and his review to me is one of the huge reasons why I published the book. And the main thing that stuck out was that he gave feedback and he talked about errors and corrections. But then at the end, he said, when you're done doing this, publish this now. And I said, what? And he reiterated, you need to publish now. And he kept pushing to do that. And so when I heard that from somebody who's already published a book, I was like, okay, well, I guess I better get to work. And then from that point, I then sent it out to different reviewers, and people were willing to read the book. And one of the biggest things also that, not having a budget, it was hard to find people to review the book for free and to take their own time to read it and to give their feedback and to do all that. So, one person told me that the book was going to cost thousands of dollars to edit and fact check. So I just didn't have that money. So what I did was I just sent it out to people I don't know, people I know, authors, and they all gave their back on any corrections or ideas or context. And then from that, I put everything together. And I was also fortunate in that my girlfriend at the time also worked as an intern for Penguin. So she had some editing experience, so she helped me out a lot. And probably the book probably wouldn't have come out as well if it wasn't for all those collective things. So it wasn't just myself. There were a lot of people that played part, who helped for this to come to fruition.
Mm-hmm.
And then also I had to go and find somebody to design the cover for a reasonable cost and finding what I want. And through Fiverr, I found a guy from Sri Lanka who designed what I thought was an amazing cover.
One thing I just wanted to come back to, I think what you said about sharing the manuscript with other people, I think that's absolutely critical. It's really, really key. And I know a lot of people, novelists in particular, I think, get very nervous about sharing their work. But I think you've shown us there just how important it is to get feedback, both constructive and to get people saying, your work is good, it's worth pursuing, and keep going, don't give up. And it's never just the writer, as you say. There's a lot of people kind of involved, whether it be a paid-for editor, whether it be your beta readers, whether it be the book designer, the cover designer, whoever. It's a kind of a team effort, isn't it? But I'm interested, because I know others will be as well. Where did you find your readers, the people who were willing to read it for free? And come back to you, that they came back to you with a response, because sometimes that's the hardest bit, is to get people to give you comments.
Right. Great. So what I will say is this, reach out to your network. More likely than not, somebody who knows something about writing, even if it's an academic, if it's somebody, even a layman. I had just normal people who don't have anything to do with reading, and they would look at it and give you their own feedback as a reader. That's also important. Mm-hmm. So I think it's about finding within your network who you think would be of the most value to you. So in writing this book, I also used my academic knowledge, because I do have extensive research apart from my experiences that I put in there. I also used my knowledge of obtaining information from credible sources, and making sure I like my sources and all that information. So I think that you can find ways around it, but within your network, in some way, shape, or form. Whether you look through some of your friends on Facebook, or your Instagram friends, or your phone book, or something, there's someone that knows something, even whether it's your mom or your dad or someone that can give you constructive feedback, or your teacher even.
So I wonder, now that you've been through it once, now that you've written your travel memoir, what would your kind of advice be, or what hints would you make to others who want to write a travel memoir for the first time? As another kind of beginner, what would you recommend they do, or what advice would you give them?
I think you should practice the subtle art of not caring. And what I mean by that is, when you're writing, just write. Forget about what people think for that moment. Forget about the whole world for that moment. Just write. You can always contextualize it when you read it and go back. That was a difficult thing for me, actually. And specifically, I'm talking about finding your voice. That was hard for me at first, because it's very easy to hide behind pretty language. From my perspective, it's very easy to hide behind language and just kind of flow along. But I felt that I needed to paint a bigger picture. So I decided that my voice was to be clear and honest and straightforward about situations, whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. We always lack on that with the lessons learned, in that particular chapter in the book. But how I found my voice was just honest, just saying what I thought and about particular situations, and then taking the context of actually searching it to check if I was right, or I was, I'm making it up. So, yeah.
Okay. That's great. Good advice. Just write what comes from the heart first, so that you find your voice, and then you can, as you say, contextualize it later. I like that.
Yeah.
You've said that the Rough Guide to Planet Earth is part of a series. So are you working on the next one now?
Right. So yes, that is a work in progress. So my next project, probably for writing, will be a Rough Guide to Planet Earth for Vietnam. Okay. And that is probably purely based on circumstances right now because of COVID. We can't really travel abroad as much, but we can travel within the country. So, and as far as I'm concerned, Vietnam is very diverse, and as far as cultures, languages, and landscapes. So there's a lot to see and do over here. So absolutely, I'd love to give my perspective on it anyway.
Yeah, and a lot of history, and the food is excellent, so you'll be enjoying that.
Absolutely.
And so where on your travels, because you have been around the block, where on your travels have you enjoyed the most? Where have you found to be one of the more interesting places? And then what's still on your hit list for when we are allowed to travel again?
Ooh, okay. So there is a small village in the northern Turkish part of Cyprus. And I traveled there, it's been more than 10 years now. And I've never felt so welcomed, so loved by random people. I went over there and people were inviting me into their homes. They want to introduce me to their families and give me tea, and they want to know where I'm from. It was an overwhelmingly positive experience for me that I have never experienced anywhere else.
And so where do you still want to go to? Because I'm guessing that your traveling bug has not left yet. I'm guessing there are still places you want to go to.
Absolutely. So let's see. Let's see if I can give you my top 5 hit list. Number 1 is, let's start with number 5. Number 5 is Newcastle, England.
That's very random. Can I ask, is that to do with football?
When I was, of course, when I was 6 years old, I grew up. And I have also friends from Newcastle as well. I'm like a Geordie living outside of Geordie land. But anyway, I've been supporting Newcastle United since I was 6 years old. Okay. I grew up watching that, so I'm like, I have to do that. That's on my bucket list at least. I know that's so random. Fourth, number 4 on my list, I'm gonna have to put Canada. I'm still very curious about Canada. I haven't, even though I spent some time in the site, I never made it up to Canada. I know there are many similarities with the US, but it's a place that fascinates me. Number 3, I'm going to say Kenya. I haven't been to Kenya, and I've heard great things about it. I could name the endless tourist destinations as well. But I imagine myself safaring in Kenya at some point. And number 2 is Burma. And the reason for that is I went to a random Spanish restaurant in Ho Chi Minh City. And then I received a phone call a few days later telling me I'd won a trip to Burma. So I won a 2-day trip to Burma. So now I just have to book the rest once we get traveling. Or it's Myanmar now. I need to say the right name. And number 1 is Japan. And the reasons for that are just endless. I mean, the technology, the culture, the people, and just seeing how such a small country can be so effective.
It's one of my favorite places in the whole. It's one of my favorite places I've visited is Japan. I would love to go and live there. I hope you make it. I think you'll love it.
All right, so maybe you can give me some tips as well.
Yes, definitely. Well, listen, Stewart, thank you so much for your time today. Where can listeners find out more about you online?
All right. So you can find me at Stewart Gatsi on Instagram. I'm also on Facebook. I have a page on Facebook. And then I also have a YouTube channel. So just type Stewart Gatsi and you'll find me there.
You're on all the socials. Well, that's brilliant. I so appreciate talking to you today.
Yeah.
You've had some lovely advice for everybody, and I look forward to seeing the next in your series.
I certainly appreciate it, and thank you for the time. I also neglected to mention, my book is also available on Amazon, so you can pretty much get it anywhere in the world.
I'll be sure to link to it in the show notes. Don't worry.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
I appreciate it.
Before you go, I wanted to tell you about my Patreon page. Whenever anyone supports the show, it expresses just how much you're enjoying the content and how much you want it to continue. Your support helps maintain the podcast and keeps it going. It means I can create better resources for you when you're listening to the podcast or checking out the webpage. It means I can focus on getting a higher reach of audience. And when we get a higher reach of audience, we can get more guests. Guests that are really going to help you. And then who knows where it'll go from there. As a new podcaster and someone who's starting out and finding their feet in the podcasting world, just as I'm helping you find your feet in the writing world, I can't do it alone. I always need help, so I'd love it if you would support the show by signing up. There's just one tier, $3 a month, and for that I'll make sure that each week I'm delivering the best podcast I can for you. And as a way of saying thanks, I'll give you a personal shout out on the show. So check out the page at patreon.com/Emma Desi. That's patreon.com/Emma Desi. See you next time.